Today on RoxomTV News, Washington is flirting with a partial government shutdown over an ICE crackdown in Minnesota that's now blowing up in courtrooms and Congress. Big oil is stuck between Wall Street and the White House as Trump pushes companies to rebuild Venezuela's oil industry right as profits are sliding. But first, Europe is tightening the screws in Iran over protest crackdowns and ties to Russia, raising the stakes in an already tense region. All that and more on today's show. Let's get into it. Good morning and happy Thursday. Welcome back to another mobile edition here at RoxomTV News. We are in our mobile studios as we wrap up the week here, but we'll be back in our normal studios come next week. So we thank you for joining us this morning. And I want to get to our top news story of the hour that's occurring inside meeting rooms in Brussels this week as European leaders quietly crossed the line that they had avoided for years when it comes to Iran. You see, after months of debate, the European Union approved a new round of sanctions targeting Iranian officials and organizations tied to violent crackdowns on protesters and Tehran's support for Russia's war in the Ukraine. Now, according to Reuters, the move reflects growing frustration among member states who believe previous measures failed to change Iran's behavior. This time, the sanctions focused directly on security forces, intelligence agencies, and financial networks accused of enforcing repression at home and helping Moscow abroad. Now, at the same time, EU ministers are moving toward formally designating Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. That would place the IRGC alongside groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and represent one of the toughest foreign policy shifts Europe has made in decades. For years now, countries like France and Germany resisted this step, worried about legal challenges and diplomatic fallout. But with Paris now backing the move, those concerns appear to be giving way to a political reality, and the stakes are high. You see, the IRGC controls major parts of Iran's economy, oversees missile and drone programs, and plays a central role in proxy conflicts across the Middle East. European officials say the goal is to stop treating Iran's human rights record, military ambitions, and Russia ties as separate issues. They're now being treated as one interconnected problem. Tehran has condemned the sanctions as politically motivated and illegal, but European leaders are signaling that patience has run out. This is no longer about sending warnings. It's about applying sustained economic and political pressure. And for audiences at home, this matters to you because escalating tensions with Iran affect energy prices, global markets, and regional stability. What happens in Brussels doesn't stay in Brussels. It ripples outward, shaping everything from fuel costs to foreign policy for years to come. Moving on to our next story that's coming from the White House this week, as the tone toward Iran shifted noticeably from cautious diplomacy to open confrontation. President Donald Trump warned that Tehran must return to nuclear negotiations or face what he called far worse military consequences. In public remarks and in social media posts, Trump pointed to last year's joint U.S.-Israeli strikes as a preview of what could happen next. Iran's leadership responded quickly, vowing retaliation against the United States, Israel, and regional allies if attacked. Meanwhile, American military preparations are accelerating. An aircraft carrier strike group has been deployed, surveillance and missile defense systems are being repositioned, and administration officials confirm that private discussions are underway about possible strike scenarios. Now, according to multiple reports, those options include targeted attacks on Iranian security forces and leadership targets. The goal would be to weaken the government and potentially spark renewed internal unrest. Now, U.S. intelligence agencies say that Iran is under real economic and political pressure, but they also warn that the leadership remains firmly in control. Regional diplomats caution that airstrikes alone are unlikely to bring reform. Instead, they could strengthen hardliners and in fact provoke retaliation against Gulf states and shipping routes. That's why countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are watching this so closely. They know they would be among the first to feel the consequences here. But for now, Washington is trying to balance threats with diplomacy. Trump says he wants a permanent ban on Iranian nuclear weapons. Tehran says it will not negotiate under pressure. Russia has entered the conversation, warning that military escalation could destabilize energy markets and the wider region. And what's unfolding is a high-stakes standoff where rhetoric, warships, and political calculation are all colliding at once. And for viewers at home, this matters to you because conflicts like this rarely stay contained. Again, they also affect oil prices, inflation, defense spending, and global stability as a whole. And once military pressure becomes policy, it's very hard to reverse. And history shows it rarely ends exactly as planned. Moving on to our third story this morning, that's going on in Beijing as British and Chinese leaders have signaled that years of strained relations may be giving way to a more pragmatic approach. Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Xi Jinping agreed to reset UK-China ties after hours of high-level talks. The meeting marked the first visit by a British Prime Minister to China in 8 years, and it produced an immediate economic headline. AstraZeneca announced a $15 billion investment to expand research and drug development operations inside China. Starmer highlighted the deal as evidence that engagement with Beijing can deliver real economic benefits. For a UK economy struggling with weak growth and rising costs, that message carries political weight. The talks extended well beyond business. The leaders discussed Russia's war in Ukraine, security cooperation, trade barriers, and human rights. Starmer raised concerns about Hong Kong and the imprisonment of media tycoon Jimmy Lai. At the same time, both sides announced progress on visas, short-term travel, and cooperation on migrant smuggling. The broader context here matters. You see, U.S. allies are increasingly hedging against uncertainty in American foreign policy under President Donald Trump. For Starmer, this visit reflects a shift away from ideological distance toward practical engagement. For Xi, it offers a chance to strengthen ties with a major Western economy amid growing global skepticism. Now, neither side is pretending tensions have disappeared, but both are betting that economic cooperation now outweighs political confrontation. And for those of you at home, this matters because UK-China relations shape supply chains, research funding, drug development, and job creation. And these deals influence where innovation happens and who controls future industries. And in a world of fractured alliances, this meeting suggests that Britain is choosing access over isolation. And that choice will define its economic path for years to come. Joining me to talk about this story and others this morning, we have one of our good friends of the program, Fernando, the Bitcoin Libertarian. Fernando, happy Thursday. Sorry about the delay this morning. It is a live show after all, but we're super glad to have you. How are you this morning?
I'm fine. I'm great. I'm happy to be here. Despite it's not my regular day, but I'm happy to be here. Here is already Friday, so happy Friday. So yeah, ready to talk about the news of the day.
Excited to have you on, especially considering you are living in the future right now. So let's get into this most recent story, Fernando. When you see the UK suddenly rebuilding ties with China and in fact announcing a huge $15 billion investment at the same time, does this feel like smart economic teamwork to you, Fernando? Or does it feel like more like both sides are ignoring some big political problems because there's money on the table? Where do you land on this most recent development between the UK and China?
Well, I think that we need to point to what happened in the Davos meeting 2 weeks ago. Remember the Prime Minister of Canada saying that there is no, that the relationship with the United States is broken. I don't remember the exact words, but he said something related to that. So I think that the world is reshaping. With Trump, with Greenland, Trump trying to take over Greenland, having problems with Europe and the allies from NATO. So I think that now most of the countries, say, okay, you United States are now against us. So we are still friends, but now we can start negotiations with China. I think that I'm not an expert on geopolitics, but I love reading about that. I think that the world is reshaping. I think that the United States is putting a lot of, all of the effort in controlling America, the whole continent. As they say, the hemisphere is ours. So I think that the goals of Trump is now Greenland, Venezuela, and strengthen the relationship with South America, starting with President Milei and most of the right-wing presidents of the other countries. So Europe is like now in the middle. It's in the middle between the United States and China. So I think that they just are doing business. So that's what I think. And when the money is on the table, especially Europe, that is in like, it's like kind of, the economy of Europe is like, it's not growing so fast. I think that if there is money on the table, we are all friends.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. And you're so right. What we're seeing right now is a dramatic reshaping of many of the alliances the United States has held on for decades now. It used to be Europe was our closest allies, a lot of the European countries, but now we're seeing that dramatic shift, and it's causing a lot of those former, still allies, but former really tight allies to kind of have to reassess the situation, because here in the United States, things are feeling really unpredictable. So it certainly seems right now that we're seeing other countries hedge their bets and say, hey, we maybe need to act on some diplomacy of our own outside of the United States right now, because right now it doesn't really feel like Trump or the US is the most predictable partner. And as we know, the world hates uncertainty, so we see other countries looking for it wherever they can find it. So a lot of big changes right now. We're going to move on to our next story here, Fernando. I'm going to be excited to chat with you about this one. And this is occurring in South Korea's capital, where lawmakers recently unveiled a sweeping new set of rules aimed at governing artificial intelligence, and immediately found themselves caught in the middle. Seoul has launched what it calls the world's first fully enforced national AI regulatory framework. The law requires companies to label AI-generated content, embed digital watermarks in synthetic media, and conduct risk assessments for high-impact systems. Now, these include tools used in hiring, healthcare, finance, and public services. Now, large AI models must also submit safety reports, although critics say the threshold is so high that few systems currently qualify. And startups argue that rules are arriving faster than their ability to comply to them. Many worry the law could slow innovation in one of Asia's most competitive tech sectors. At the same time, civil rights groups say the framework doesn't go far enough. They argue it focuses on corporate compliance rather than protecting individuals harmed by biased algorithms or deepfake abuse. Those concerns are especially sharp in South Korea, which accounts for more than half reported global deepfake victims. Now, government officials defend the law as trust-based regulation designed to evolve over time. They say it offers more flexibility than Europe's strict model and less state control than China's approach. Now, the aim is to balance innovation with public safety. Whether that balance holds is now the real test here. If compliance costs rise too high, companies may shift investment elsewhere. If protections remain weak, public trust in AI could collapse entirely. And for those of you at home, this should matter to you, because South Korea is helping shape how AI will be governed worldwide. What works or fails there will inevitably be copied elsewhere. And that means these rules may ultimately influence how much control you have over the technology shaping your job, privacy, and daily life. We're bringing Fernando back. Fernando, when you hear that South Korea now requires labels on AI content, we're talking watermarks on deepfakes and safety reviews, does that sound like a smart protection idea to you, or is that the government getting in the way too early on AI regulation? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that this is also when like social media stuff, like it's like a thin line between like the safety of the people and the government trying to control everything. So I think that of course there is a huge mess with everything happening in the AI world. I heard about scams using deepfake. By the way, if someone approach any one of our viewers telling that I'm asking money, I don't ask money. When I invite to the people to my podcast, I don't ask people to download anything. So This is something that is happening. So I think that it's a little bit, we need some kind of protection against that, but usually the governments go an extra mile on the protection. And on the other side, I don't know what can we do against that. I don't know what effective, because AI is moving very fast. It's not like, okay, during the COVID era, when you upload something and you were tagged that this is misinformation, now AI is evolving. So probably the scammers or the people working on that models evolve faster than the government control. So this is a thin line. To be honest, I'm against any kind of government control. because there are a lot of resources spent, and on the end of the day, are not effective. So, and especially when we are talking about AI, I think that what we need to do is try to educate people, or try to be aware, or try to raise the awareness of what can happen with AI. But if you try to control AI, it's a battle. It's a lost battle, in my opinion. And I think that governments can use this to, let's go and let's control people.
It's possible. This is a really tough one because you're having to walk that fine line between protecting people, but also potentially stunting innovation along the way. But, I'm never one who wants to stunt potential innovation, but this one is tricky because we've seen deepfakes already. They are getting scarily good, and we're seeing so many people get scammed by them every day. It's happening all the time, and some of them are so unbelievable. I saw a girl who got deepfaked by somebody who pretended he was Brad Pitt for like months. And it was literally just photos of Brad Pitt. This guy, used AI to Photoshop, and she ended up sending him tons of money. So it's really easy, and it does present a danger, especially to probably our older generations out there that aren't as familiar with the tech. So, while again, I don't like the idea of potentially bogging down big tech and rules, this is something I think we need to have some rules in place for. At least that way, big tech knows what they are and they can work around those rules and know, we can't just, it's a little too easy for me to pretend that I'm anybody else right now, even over a video call. And that is going to cause some serious problems. I would especially be concerned in the KYC realm. Am I going to be able to just be a deep fake of you, Fernando, and then it takes a picture of me, thinks it's you, and then I can get your credentials for your wallets or something? This could get really scary really fast. So while I don't like bogging down innovation, I think we need some rules here because this is getting a little creepy and a little too good, a little too fast. But we'll see how it plays out. It looks like South Korea is certainly setting the stage for a lot of big tech rules coming down the pipeline. So we'll see what happens there, and see if it ends up ultimately going that same way here in the United States. Well, Fernando, again, I want to apologize, guys. We had a rough and late start this morning. We had some tech problems, but Fernando, we're so glad, as always, you got to join us for an extra day this week. It's always such a pleasure. Thank you for for joining us on the show. And before we go, though, you have your own amazing Bitcoin podcast that every Bitcoiner out there, and even non-Bitcoiners, should be listening into. So really quick, tell us where we can find it and how we can watch it, because it's a great one.
Yes. The most important thing is I am trying to do my podcast for non-Bitcoiners, so people who wants to come and learn about Bitcoin. I have two podcasts. I have two YouTube channels. One in English, Libertarian BTC. The other in Spanish, Libertarian BTC ESP. In the Spanish side, we are creating much more content because we are doing lives in the morning of Hong Kong, in the night of Latin America. We are doing podcasts every day, and also our X account. The Bitcoin, THE, Bitcoin _ is the account in English, and the Bitcoin, THE, Bitcoin ESP _ is our account in Spanish.
Amazing. Well, everyone, definitely go check those out. You'd be doing yourself a disservice not to. Fernando, always a pleasure. Excited to have you back on again real soon, maybe as early as tomorrow. We'll see what the producers
got tomorrow. Tomorrow, Friday, we can meet again. So thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks, Fernando. We'll see you tomorrow, buddy. All right, we're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News. But when we're back, I'm going to be joined for the second hour of today's show by another one of our RoxomTV hosts, Walker America, as we're going to co-host this second hour and talk about the biggest news stories of the day. You won't want to miss it, so stay tuned. More RoxomTV News coming your way right after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed two brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Before we get into the second hour of today's program, here's a quick recap of the first hour of today's show. The first thing we looked at was how the European Union has approved a new round of sanctions on Iran and is moving closer to labeling the Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, signaling that Europe is done treating human rights abuses, military activity, and Russia ties as separate issues. We broke down why this matters for energy prices, regional stability, and global markets, and how decisions made in Brussels are now reshaping the West's entire approach to Tehran. Next, we covered President Trump's warning that Iran could face military action if nuclear talks don't resume, as the U.S. ramps up its military presence in the region with carriers, missile defenses, and strike planning. We discussed why regional allies are now nervous, how airstrikes could backfire, and what this growing standoff means for oil prices, inflation, and the risk of another long-term conflict. Now, joining me to co-host the second hour of today's show is RoxomTV's own Walker America. Walker, welcome. Happy Thursday. Always great seeing you. How are you?
Doing great, Hank. Again, always better once we're back on the stream together.
That's such a nice thing to say. And I see you are also, looks like, from a remote studio today. So we're simpatico on that one, away from our normal homes, but I'm excited to get into it with you. So guys, let's roll the stinger and get into our first story of the second hour. All right, we're beginning with a story that is now reaching well beyond Minnesota, because what started as a deadly encounter between federal and immigration agents and an ICU nurse in Minneapolis is now helping drive Washington toward the edge of a partial government shutdown, as lawmakers clash over funding, oversight, and accountability inside the Department of Homeland Security. Now, at the center of this standoff is the fatal shooting of Alex Preddy, a case that has triggered court challenges, internal policy changes, political confrontation, and a growing crisis of trust between communities and federal authorities. An initial government review shared with Congress concluded that Preddy was shot by two officers during an attempt to move him and another woman from the street after agents used pepper spray and became involved in a physical struggle. Now, during that confrontation, officers repeatedly shouted that Preddy had a gun, and early statements from the Trump administration officials leaned heavily on that very claim, portraying him as an immediate threat and framing the shooting itself as an act of self-defense. But as more evidence emerged, that narrative began to unravel. You see, the review did not indicate that Preddy pointed his weapon, and video later showed that his firearm remained holstered and was removed by an officer before he was shot. Independent analysts at the BBC verified that footage. Here is that video. Take a look.
He's wrestled to the ground by a number of agents. He's on his knees, bent over. His hands are on the floor, and he's struggling against being held down. One agent repeatedly strikes in the direction of his head. And take note of this agent. He has nothing in his right hand, reaches down and removes what appears to be a gun from Alex Preddy's waistband. Then he steps back, holding the pistol, which appears to match this image shared by the authorities. Carrying this type of gun is legal in Minnesota with a valid permit. The police say they believe Alex Preddy had one. Less than a second after the gun is removed.
Now, despite those findings, several officials continued for days to describe Preddy as an aggressor, creating a widening gap between official claims and publicly available evidence that has fueled anger, protest, and deepening skepticism. As public pressure mounted, Immigration and Customs Enforcement began quietly adjusting its approach. Internal directives obtained by Reuters show that officers in Minnesota were instructed to avoid confrontations with crowds, disengage from verbal disputes, and limit interactions with protesters and so-called agitators. Officials inside DHS have acknowledged concern that routine enforcement encounters were escalating into volatile situations that carried serious legal and political risk. At the same time, federal courts began asserting greater oversight. Judges blocked certain detentions, demanded explanations from ICE leadership, and questioned whether court orders were being followed, with one major ruling halting the detention of refugees in Minnesota over due process concerns. Those interventions added legal pressure to an already strained enforcement campaign, and the political consequences soon reached Capitol Hill. Senate Democrats announced they would withhold support for DHS funding unless the administration agreed to reforms including banning face coverings, expanding body camera usage, and tightening rules on the use of force. Now, because the Department of Homeland Security funding is tied to broader budget legislation, that position has now raised the possibility of a partial government shutdown. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer made the stance clear in recent remarks. Here's what he had to say.
ICE is doing is state-sanctioned thuggery. It must stop. Democrats stand ready today to pass the 5 bipartisan bills in the Senate. But the DHS bill needs serious work, and Republicans and Democrats alike owe it to the American people to get it right. It's now on Leader Thune to separate out the DHS bill, just as Speaker Johnson did in the House, and start working with Democrats to rein in ICE, imposing oversight, accountability, and empowering local law enforcement in our communities.
Now, Republicans argue Democrats are exploiting a tragedy for political leverage, while Democrats counter that repeated fatal encounters demonstrate a need for structural reform. Meanwhile, new reporting has added important context to the timeline leading up to Preddy's death. Video recorded 11 days earlier shows federal agents firing tear gas and pepper balls during a separate confrontation in his neighborhood, raising questions about whether tensions had been building for weeks. Here's that footage.
Shows a man who resembles Alex Preddy during an encounter with federal agents recorded 11 days before he was fatally shot. In the video, the man is seen yelling at agents as they get into their vehicles. When they drive off, he kicks a taillight. An agent jumps out, grabs him, and slams him to the ground. Moments later, the agents retreat, and the man walks away.
Community leaders say these earlier clashes suggest a pattern of escalation rather than an isolated incident. President Trump has since adopted a more measured tone, saying he is reviewing enforcement practices and is open to limited de-escalation, although senior advisors remain divided over whether any changes should be temporary or permanent. That uncertainty has become a defining feature of the administration's response. And that brings us to what conditions look like on the ground in Minnesota. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But first, I want to bring Walker in. Walker, what is your beat on this most recent tragedy we've seen in Minnesota? We've got more evidence now. Initially, the administration came out, said he was the aggressor. They even went as far as saying, I think he had a gun pointed at them, but we have video evidence now that seems to refute all those claims. And now the administration is taking a very different stance. What's your initial beat on these new happenings in Minnesota?
Look, I think that what we're seeing here is just a continued escalation, and I don't know if the actual reasoning behind it, despite what the pundits are saying, is just simply these anti-ICE, the anti-ICE protests. Like, let's go a level deeper, because if we look at this, Hank, we didn't see these kind of protests during President Obama's term in office, where he deported, I think, something like over 5 million illegal immigrants, right? We didn't see it during Biden. He had something like 7 million illegal immigrants deported, nor during Bush, around 10 million, nor during Clinton, almost 13 million. And so when I look at this and I see that, Trump has deported maybe a couple million so far, not even on the level yet of some of these other presidents, and I see the rhetoric around this, it just makes me wonder, okay, is this the real story here, or is this just another flashpoint that's being used to drive an alternate agenda? I don't know. Regardless, the loss of life is always tragic, right? This is not something, nobody's celebrating the loss of life here. That is tragic. I don't know if this shooting was justified. I think it's also very easy to play armchair expert and say, well, you should have done this in that split second while you were, thinking that your life was in danger. It's hard for us to say. But then if you zoom out a little bit too, I think there's something like over 20,000 ICE officers in the U.S. and they're averaging, each officer is interacting with civilians many times per day, right? And over the course of, let's say, 6 months here, we've had, millions and millions of ICE interactions on that level. So, basically less than, 1 in a million of these interactions results in a fatality. Now, you can say that that's still too many, right? That's still too many. But at the same time, all of this rhetoric that's out there comparing ICE to the Gestapo, comparing, calling Trump Hitler, which has been done for a very, very long time. All of this rhetoric is out there stoking up this rage. And you have to wonder who's ultimately benefiting from this, because this rage wasn't present when other presidents were deporting illegal immigrants, right? The laws are on the books about these things. Now, you may not like the laws, and that's fine. But where do we challenge laws? Well, we challenge laws in the courts and in Congress, right? That's if you want laws to be changed, if you don't like the laws, but you were somehow okay with those laws being enforced by Obama or Biden, well, then I just have to wonder, what's the real story here? It seems like a lot of people, I mean, I don't know how much the hyper online culture of 24/7, 365 access to information and tragedy constantly being drilled into your subconscious over and over and over again, it'd make the most reasonable person do some crazy things. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. I think if people want to see these, if you don't want to have these interactions happen, it's probably a good idea not to be engaging in these sorts of situations in the first place. Now, you should peacefully protest. That is absolutely your right as an American, right? That is a right that we have fought hard for. At the same time, you need to know that if you're entering into these high stakes situations, if you are engaging in an antagonistic way with federal or state or local officers, there's a chance that something bad may happen. I'm not saying that it's right when it does, but I'm saying you have to be realistic about it, and you have to wonder if certain leaders are using these sorts of things, these tragedies, to their advantage. I don't know, let's see, but again, I find the hypocrisy to be pretty alarming when you look at the reaction to prior presidents doing the exact same things Trump's doing, and Trump doing it now. This isn't an endorsement of Trump's actions, this is an endorsement of Trump. It's just pointing out an obvious fact, which is that it seems that the only times that certain agitators seem to care about these things are when they are activated to do so. And it certainly wasn't during prior administrations, but we're seeing it by the thousands and thousands now. So what changed? I don't know. I'll leave that up to the viewer.
Yeah, no, I understand your point on that, but I think there's something to be said for the fact that all of a sudden the administration has really changed its tone pretty considerably after video evidence that this came out. So there is something to be said to, while you're right, we saw way more deportations with Obama, for instance, but there's a method to the madness. And I think the method here is a little bit too close to madness for me, because I've seen several videos now of different ICE agents literally threatening people if they as much as videotape. I heard one guy said something to the effect of, you either erase that video or I'll erase you. And people insinuating that, or ICE agents specifically insinuating that bad things will happen if they're even videotaped. So while I agree with you, there could be some political motivations to this. There usually are. I think there's the way that this is being going about and the way that these ICE agents are being trained is clearly lacking. And the very fact that you're seeing the administration step back now from their previous stance, which was called way too early in advance. They literally said the guy was brandishing a weapon at ICE agents, which was completely untrue. It's hard for me to trust the current administration in anything they're doing when that was a straight up lie that they were giving to everybody off the jump. And then like, oh, look, there's multiple video angles completely contradicting this tale. So there's always political motivations, and people are going to use these for their own political agendas, and I get that. But there's definitely something to be said about, I feel like, the way this is currently being handled by this administration that is rubbing a lot of American citizens the wrong way and frankly putting them in danger. You should be able to film ICE protesters on the side of the road without the fear of getting shot, I would hope. But it's a more complicated issue than that, and I'll be the first person to agree on that. And I want to get on to the de-escalation efforts here, and we're going to keep chatting about this, Walker, because despite the talk of de-escalation that we're seeing from Washington now, residents across Minneapolis and St. Paul are still saying that federal agents remain highly visible, with community monitoring groups continuing to report frequent ICE activity in neighborhoods, transit areas, and commercial districts. Parents, teachers, and aid workers alike told The Guardian that fear has spread into schools and daily routines, with some children staying at home and some families temporarily relocating to avoid potential encounters. An internal ICE memo reviewed by Reuters shows that officers have been instructed to focus more narrowly on immigrants with criminal records and move away from broad street stop practices, reflecting a shift toward more targeted operations. Now, after briefly slowing, raids have resumed under these revised guidelines, which observers describe as a change in tone rather than a full pullback. Attorney General Pam Bondi has reinforced that enforcement remains active, announcing dozens of arrests for allegedly interfering with federal agents. And the result has been a confusing mix of softer rhetoric and continued activity, leaving communities uncertain about what to expect next. Local leaders say trust remains low, legal challenges continue, and residents are preparing for a prolonged federal presence regardless of the shifting messaging from Washington. So I want to get back to Walker here. Walker, when you hear parents and teachers and families are literally saying they're scared to leave home and kids are scared of staying out or of going to school because they don't know what's going to happen next, what goes through your mind with that? And what does that kind of tell you about how people are feeling about the administration's practices right now, specifically with ICE agents? It sounds kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, understandably so. I think you'd probably see a lot less fear if there wasn't known, let's say, known clashes that were going to happen, right? So there's two parts to this. Nobody wants to see children terrified to leave their homes. You'd have to be a psycho to think that, right? Nobody wants to see that. At the same time, I think that we're in an interesting position where the question is, do you enforce the laws that are on the books? And that we have, that have passed Congress, that have been the law of the land for many years, that have been enforced by prior presidents, or do you not? And then if you are not going to do that, what is your reason for doing it? Is it because you are kind of basically bowing down to a mob rule? Okay, what sort of precedent does that set? Now, in terms of like people being afraid to leave their house, I'm not sure if they're speaking here about people who are themselves illegal immigrants. If they're talking about general community members, it seems that general community members have no problem leaving their house and going out, to protest. Which again, great. You should be able to protest. That's fantastic. You should protest as much as you want. You should also be able to be armed at those protests. That is your constitutional right. And as has been pointed out, it's been very, I think, concerning to see some of the rhetoric from folks that are basically condemning Alex Preddy just for carrying a gun. Now, granted, you can say that carrying a gun to a quote mostly peaceful protest may have repercussions. That is true, but it is your right to do so as an American citizen. That is a constitutionally guaranteed right. It's very troublesome when you see people saying, "Well, he shouldn't be carrying a gun." That's setting aside the specific circumstances at play here. But overall, I think it's the sad thing is that both these types of situations are always used as partisan footballs. They're always used to punt the blame back and forth while politicians escalate the rhetoric on both sides of this, right? Neither side is in any way innocent in this. Escalation of rhetoric, escalation of actions, and then tragedy strikes, and both sides blame each other for it. And around we go. The pendulum swings, and nothing materially changes except people end up getting hurt. People lose more trust in institutions. That's happening anyway, though. There's not really anything they can do to stop that. And at the end of the day, it's like, I think the situation's going to get a heck of a lot worse before it gets better. But, again, it becomes a question of ICE is operating in all 50 states of the country. Why are we seeing such massive backlash, specifically in Minnesota, conveniently right on the heels of massive fraud being discovered in that state? Probably just a coincidence, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure it's just a strange coincidence there. But I think these are questions that we should continue to ask.
Yeah, you're totally right. The Somali fraud case, that seems to have gone by the wayside, to your point. Again, we've talked about it before on the show together. Still waiting to hear about those Epstein files. So there's a lot of look over here-ness right now where there's a lot of questions that we were asking and were demanding answers to only a few weeks ago that nobody is seemingly getting right now. And, you mentioned on something that I when you were chatting here, one thing I've noticed about a situation like this that's kind of like an indictment on where we are as a country right now is that you're either complete agreement or disagreement with either side with all that's happening. I wish we could look at this from a more objective lens and be like, listen, I can agree that immigration enforcement needs to be tighter, but I can also agree that maybe some of these enforcement practices that are resulting in the deaths of American citizens at the hands of federal troops aren't the best way to go about it. But in today's world, you're either all in with it or you're all out. And I think that's not really the right lens that we need to be looking through. And that kind of is indictment of the partisan system we're in now. And we can't, it's all about ultimately winning or ultimately having the other side lose. And we can't say, hey, I disagree with this, but I agree with that. And this is an exact instance of that. And I've seen the comments of people online. They can't ignite, it's almost like you can't be pro-immigration, but also say hey, maybe there's a better way to go about this. And that kind of saddens me because this clearly isn't working the way that we would hope, at least for terms of American citizen safety. But anyway, let's keep moving on because you touched on something I want to talk about now, which is kind of the erosion of trust that we've been seeing as a result of this and has fundamentally been compounded by a broader pattern of documented instances, as according to Reuters. You see, a detailed investigation found that federal immigration officials repeatedly issued public statements after violent encounters that related contradicted by video, court filings, or medical evidence. In Preddy's case, officials initially described him as armed and threatening, while later footage showed he was only holding a cell phone. In another incident involving Venezuelan migrant Julio Sosa Silas, the Department of Homeland Security claimed officers were ambushed, while an FBI affidavit later revealed they had pursued the wrong vehicle. After a Cuban detainee died in Texas, officials cited medical distress before a medical examiner ruled the death as a homicide. In Chicago, a senior official claimed he had been injured during a protest, only to admit in court that he had not. And in California, U.S. citizen Marima Martinez was shot multiple times after officials said she rammed officers, while body camera footage showed her weapon remained in her purse. And for former DHS officials, one of them told Reuters that this represents a departure from past practice, when agencies typically waited for investigations before issuing definitive public accounts. Critics argue that rushing to defend officers before facts are established has intensified the protest, hardened legal scrutiny, and damaged institutional credibility. We're bringing Walker back. Walker, when early official statements keep getting contradicted later by video and court records, how does that affect the way you personally process stories like this? How does that leave you feeling?
Well, it leaves me feeling like I generally don't trust the first reports of anything from anyone. I think that there's a tendency, given, again, what we mentioned earlier, the hyper online, hyper aware, 24/7, 365, second by second news coverage, and the algorithmic incentive in so many of these social media platforms to be the first to break the story. We've actually seen this with the disclosure of some of the information about how X handles their algorithm. And it shows that if you are one of the first to post about something, that gets the most traction, right? Regardless of the veracity of it, regardless of the nuance that it's explored in that post, it's about posting first. So that goes the same for government agencies, who a lot of times their first method of dissemination for their message is not to go on a cable news broadcast. It's to go on social media and to post about it from official accounts. It's to get that message out there. And often the first telling of a story is the stickiest one. This is not just for this situation in particular. This is more broadly. The first story, what's the old line? A lie can make it around the world twice before the truth has had a chance to put its pants on, right? So you've got this situation where people are incentivized, both from an algorithmic perspective and also just from a narrative perspective, to come out with their version of the story first. Now, to your earlier point, Hank, which I think is really important, just about the fact that it's this whole, if you're not with us, you're against us. You have to be 0 or 1. You have to be red or blue. You have to choose Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. They're basically the same at the end of the day. It's all the uniparty, but hey, at least you get to feel like you're drinking a different type of cola. But don't you dare speak badly about your own particular team's color. You can only speak well about your team, only speak bad about the other. And as we know, Hank, the truth is most often in the middle. So much of this rhetoric is designed to inflame, it's designed to antagonize, it's designed to try and get out ahead of whatever the real truth may be. It's also typically very inconvenient to remember what the past has taught us about this. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. We've seen these sorts of things before, and this goes back to something that you and I have drilled home on just about every, I think, stream we've been on here, which is, what's all of this trying to cover up for? Whether it's the Somali fraud, whether it's the Epstein files, on whichever side of things you're talking about here. It just seems like all of this is very convenient timing, and all the loss of life that comes with it is tragic. But ultimately, it's not the first time that citizens have been agitated and used as partisan footballs by whatever regime happens to be in power at any given time. So, sadly, par for the course, Hank, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it is absolutely has a lot to do with the time we live in. It's that, they talk about it like in tech, it's that first mover advantage. And on social media, that exists too. To your point, people don't wait for the news broadcast. You'll have senators going on their phone reporting information that may or may not be verified because, like you said, that gets the most clicks, that gets the most traction. So that also has a lot to do with everything we're seeing here, and certainly amplifying this situation far beyond what it maybe should be. So you make a lot of good points there, as usual, Walker, and we have a lot more to talk about on today's show. But first, we're going to take a quick break here. But when we're back, Walker and I are going to be jamming about some more of today's top news stories. So stay tuned. More RoxomTV news coming your way right after this. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. The price of Bitcoin is just above 85,000 infinitely printable US dollars, Federal Reserve notes, you may know them as, per Bitcoin. I'm here with Hank. We're going to get right into our next story, which is on the SEC and the CFTC convening today on crypto policy. So the first real US crypto market structure markup unfolded today in Washington. It's now official. Lawmakers on the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture have passed the crypto market structure legislation out of committee, sending the bill to the full Senate for debate and to move then to a formal rulemaking on how digital asset markets will be regulated going forward. To follow, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission are holding a rare joint public event focused on aligning their regulatory approaches to Bitcoin and crypto markets. That session will be streaming here on RoxomTV today starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And happening on Monday, the White House is set to meet with crypto and banking leaders, executives from the crypto and banking industries on Monday to discuss upcoming market structure legislation. The meeting is expected to focus on how digital asset markets should be regulated in the United States, including oversight responsibilities, consumer protections, and the role of traditional financial institutions as Bitcoin and digital assets become more integrated into the traditional financial system. Reuters reports that gathering comes as lawmakers accelerate efforts to pass comprehensive market structure rules, potentially clarifying jurisdictional boundaries between regulators and setting clear guidelines for exchanges, custodians, and intermediaries. The timing is notable, with Bitcoin adoption expanding across Wall Street, corporate treasuries, and state-level initiatives. Washington is under increased pressure to provide regulatory clarity rather than enforcement by headline. While the discussion centers on crypto, the outcome matters most for Bitcoin. Clear, durable rules could unlock further institutional participation, while regulatory ambiguity continues to favor incumbents and offshore markets. Monday's meeting signals that the market structure is now top-level policy in Washington, and importantly, within that is also hidden a number of developer protections for open-source developers, which is particularly important, especially in the cases of Tornado Cash, the Samurai Wallet developers, Bill and Keone, something we've covered here extensively on Roxom. But I want to go ahead and bring up Hank back onto the show here. Hank, we've seen a lot of posturing, a lot of negotiating between the sort of crypto lobby, the Washington, and then the banking lobby, sort of a love triangle of sorts right now.
Yeah.
You've seen a big pushback from the banking lobby on what they view as too much competition to their bottom line, specifically on the topic of stable coins offering yield. I want to get your take on this. I mean, do you think that this is something where finally the traditional financial institutions are really embracing Bitcoin and crypto, or are they still sort of pushing back to the extent that, look, they know that this is going to basically obsolete them eventually? The stablecoin interest issue on the stablecoins held in deposits is a clear example of that. So I'd love to get your take on that. I mean, is this Wall Street really embracing Bitcoin and crypto, or are they still kind of scared that their territory is being infringed upon?
Yeah, this is an interesting situation. And first, let me shed a tear for big banks everywhere that they're finally having to undergo some competition. I feel so terrible for them. But this is an interesting spot, right? Because this is kind of showing that the crypto industry has reached a level of systemic importance. It's no longer operating in these legal gray zones on the fringe. It's now competing directly with banks, payment networks, and financial institutions, which is kind of part of the the problem here, right? But we need to see some regulations because, as you mentioned, banks are concerned that if stablecoins start offering yield, then everybody's going to move all of this free money they get and offer almost nothing in return to customers. And people are going to be putting it into stablecoins and actually generating yield for themselves. So, this is obviously something that needs to be tackled, especially because, Trump was courting all of these crypto donors and people when he was, bidding for his reelection. So he's kind of stuck in a rock and a hard place where he's got big banks that don't seem super thrilled about stablecoin regulations, specifically them earning yield, but he also kind of needs to follow through on this. Otherwise, I think there's going to be a lot of people in the industry that aren't really trusting what he's been putting out there. So it's a really unique spot right now, but I feel no sympathy for banks having to compete with stablecoins. They've been ripping us off for as long as you and I have been alive. So I'm here for it. I will be excited to see this structure and this clarity get put in place, hopefully sooner than later. But I feel no ounce of sadness for a bank anywhere. That's where I stand on it. What about you, Walker?
Well, I'm in the same boat. I mean, it's really hard to, feel sympathy for these big banks that have basically used this system to their advantage and to the detriment of the average American citizen. They have been, setting the rules and had incredible influence in Washington for a long time. There's been a revolving door, well known, between Washington and Wall Street. This is not something that's new. It's also between the Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department. There's a lot of revolving doors going around there and a lot of money changing hands. And at the end of the day, you have to look at this and just realize that these bankers are scrambling. They've been trying to figure out for a long time, how is it that we can profit off of this, Bitcoin and crypto phenomenon? Because apparently it's not going away, they seem to have realized. And now it sort of starts to seem that maybe they're realizing, what did we do a little, too late? Are we kind of losing our regulatory moat? Because that's what these big, massive corporations rely on, is that regulatory moat that they can further expand using their influence in Washington, which makes it more and more difficult for new upstarts and non-incumbents to come in and challenge the incumbent inertia that is there. And so I think that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it allows anyone to be their own bank. Now, the stablecoins thing is a separate thing, right? This is not so much a stablecoin as a guaranteed loss in value coin, because ultimately it's tracking the value of the US dollar. But given that, it is also important, I think it's ridiculous if this part of the bill gets killed, that they won't allow stablecoin issuers to offer yield on stablecoin deposits. That just basically lets you know that Washington is completely subservient to the banking lobby. What I'm most interested in seeing come out of these bills is the open source developer protections, so that we can get some real clarity on that. The government doesn't give you rights, but they sure as heck do try to take them away. That's what we've seen in the case of these open source developers like Tornado Cash, like the Samurai Wallet developers, Bill and Keone. And I think that is ultimately, for me as a Bitcoiner, that's the most important thing that could come out of this legislation, is some real protections built in for open source developers so that we can keep innovating and building open source freedom tech here in America without throwing some of our best and brightest developers in federal prison for the crime of writing open source software. So I would love to see that. That's really the only thing that I care about. I don't care about too much about the stablecoin side of things. It is important to follow, and I think it tells us a lot about where the true power lies in Washington and Wall Street. But let's see what happens.
Yeah, no, I totally on board with you. The last thing we want to be doing right now is stifling innovation, especially from brilliant minds that are able to create these products in the first place. There's a lot better things we can be doing than putting them in the slammer. That's just crazy to me. And, Washington right now is already pretty embedded with crypto and Bitcoin. And this next story is going to tell us just about how much. So let's get into this one now, because from Silicon Valley boardrooms to Washington policy circles, a new federal savings program is quietly becoming a test case for how crypto fits into everyday American life. Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong is now tying Bitcoin directly into President Trump's new Trump Accounts initiative, a government-backed effort designed to help families start investing for their children from birth. In a post on X, Armstrong said Coinbase plans to match the federal government's $1,000 contribution for eligible children of Coinbase employees, and suggested that the match could be paid in Bitcoin. He said, starting to invest early is more important than ever. Armstrong wrote, calling the program a boost for financial security and literacy, and adding that he hopes Coinbase can deliver its contribution in BTC. Now, the Trump Accounts program provides a $1,000 seed investment from the U.S. Treasury for children born between 2025 and 2028. That money is placed into low-cost index funds managed by custodial parents or guardians and locked up until adulthood, with the goal of encouraging long-term saving rather than short-term speculation. In effect, it's a government-sponsored starter portfolio for every qualifying newborn. And the White House has confirmed that dozens of major employers are already participating by offering matching contributions as part of employee benefits. That list includes companies like Uber, Charles Schwab, Intel, Nvidia, Broadcom, IBM, Charter Communications, and even Steak and Shake. Now, most of those matches are expected to be made in traditional dollars. Armstrong's suggestion stands out because it reframes the program through a crypto lens. Instead of treating Bitcoin as something people discover in their 20s or 30s after reading market headlines, this approach introduces it at birth, embedded inside a federal savings structure. It reflects a broader shift in how crypto leaders are positioning Bitcoin, less as a speculative side bet, more as a generational store of value and a default savings layer. Supporters argue this could help normalize responsible long-term investing and financial literacy from an early age. Critics worry it blurs the line between public policy and private crypto promotion, especially when volatility is involved. And for those of you at home, this matters because it shows how deeply digital assets are starting to seep into mainstream systems. When Bitcoin becomes part of employee benefits and government-linked programs, it stops being niche and it becomes infrastructure. And once something becomes infrastructure, it's no longer optional. It becomes part of how the next generation learns, saves, and builds wealth. All right, bringing Walker back. Walker, what are your initial thoughts on these Trump accounts and then Coinbase coming out and saying they would match those accounts if they start them on Coinbase and potentially in BTC? What's your initial beat on this?
Well, I would just hope that Coinbase isn't trying to pull a bait and switch and actually match the accounts in some sort of altcoin. They seem to be moving further away from altcoins and further toward prediction markets as they realize that alt season will never, in fact, be coming. Everything bleeds against Bitcoin over time. Zooming out with regard to the Trump accounts more broadly, I mean, do I think that this sounds like a nice idea? Sure, sounds like a nice idea. It sounds like something, though, that is really just designed to offer yet another structural bid to prop up U.S. equity markets over time. It sounds like something that ultimately just ends up, yes, it sounds great. Let's give kids these starter accounts, sure. But I want one for my son, absolutely. I think he kind of was, he was a little too old for it. Like he missed it by just a bit, darn. But the larger point here is that I think much like passive allocations from 401ks, which were actually never really meant to be retirement accounts. They're meant to be part of a larger retirement structure. But much like that passive bid that comes from those 401k accounts, I think that these are really just going to be serve to just prop up equity markets more broadly. It offers a constant structural bid to equity markets. And again, sure, does it sound like a good idea? Yeah, it sounds kind of good on its face. Like, would I say no? Like, if everybody else is getting it, am I going to say no to this for my kids? No, I'm not going to. But at the same time, I think that this is, again, just one of those things that it sounds pretty great in theory, sure, but what kind of actual impact does it have in the long term? When you create something that is there for absolutely everyone, it's the new baseline. It's not actually an advantage. It's just something that then exists there for everyone. Everyone starts out with it. Okay, that sounds great. I think that maybe this is going to be something that's helpful for kids in the long term. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I cannot help but view it as just a forced structural bid for the US stock market, which is what it kind of seems like to me.
Yeah, that very well may be the case, but I think there are some good things in this. Like, they don't teach this type of stuff in schools, and everybody's going to be a lot more incentivized to participate and inform themselves if they have some skin initially in the game. But the thing that really stuck out to me about this is I feel like this is maybe the government's way of kind of maybe appeasing banks and these big crypto companies a little bit, because essentially if you're doing this, right, and you're a company, you say, I'm going to match. If you do it with us, I'm going to match that $1,000. That's a pretty low customer acquisition cost for a potentially new lifetime customer. If I'm Chase Bank, I'm going to say I'm doubling this for everybody so that I can get these kids as babies set up with Chase accounts. All of a sudden, I now have a new Chase customer, probably for life, right? So I think there's a part of that we kind of need to consider, but I think anything that gives people more reason to become more knowledgeable in financial literacy and that things at an early age is a great thing, because we don't do a good job teaching those in schools. I think you're right. It probably is kind of propping up the market in a sense too. Again, like we said, there's always some kind of political motivation behind these type of things to an extent. But on the whole, I think it's a win until we learn otherwise. I mean, that's kind of my beat on it. I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, hey, anytime the government's going to give you free money, everyone says yes, right? And
right.
When has giving people free money ever had negative consequences? I can't think of a single time, Hank.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm sure this will end perfectly well. There won't be any sort of negative externalities that people couldn't plan for here. and that this absolutely is going to be nothing but a net positive. So I'm excited to see it again. When the government hands you free money, it's like, I've heard that there is such thing as a free lunch. So I'm going to be taking mine and gobbling down every single bite, Hank.
Yeah, I mean, if I can put it into Bitcoin at least,
Exactly.
at least that's good. All right, I think we got one more story on the day, Walker, and you're leading it, bud.
Yeah, yes, this is an interesting one, and it's one that I thought that we were past. But New Scientist, a scientific publication, apparently of some reputation, has basically gotten had their Bitcoin slandering posts shut down after their attack by Community Notes. And so here's what happened. This week, New Scientist published a video and accompanying post on X related to a podcast they had just launched, saying, quote, "Bitcoin is one big disaster for the environment." The video asserted that Bitcoin mining consumes excessive energy, is a poor investment, and fuels crime on the dark web, even asking whether Bitcoin could be the worst idea of the 21st century. Let's go ahead and take a look at the video.
The problem isn't necessarily Bitcoin itself or cryptocurrency itself. It's actually the mining. It takes a colossal amount of computing power to mine a single Bitcoin. It uses up as much energy as some entire countries still. Just Bitcoin, not cryptocurrency in general.
And in terms of if it is a good investment or not, you had some interesting comparisons with that, didn't you?
Basically, if you look at sort of the recent history, you're better off just buying a bunch of Pokemon cards than Bitcoin. It is just a big betting market. The other problem is that you can't use Bitcoin for anything. So if you've got a bunch of Bitcoin, it's hard to make a transaction. Very few places accept it. The average carbon footprint of a flight from London to New York is smaller than a single Bitcoin transaction. So environmentally, it would be better to just take your cash and put it in a briefcase and fly it to wherever you're sending it. So right now, it's just this betting market that's great if you want to do crimes in an untraceable way, but it's not useful for a whole lot more than that.
Yeah, so you mentioned the dark web, basically. So you can't buy firearms and missiles with Pokemon cards, but you can with Bitcoin. The dark web, it didn't really exist before Bitcoin came along, did it?
Woof. So the response was immediate. The post was community noted, with users linking to dozens of peer-reviewed studies challenging each claim made in the video. One prominent note cited established research showing that the use of virtual assets for money laundering remains far below that of fiat currency. Shocker, they like to use the dollar, and it's the world's preferred method for laundering money. And this directly contradicts that crime narrative. Now, on the environmental side, the community notes and replies included links to more than 20 peer-reviewed papers highlighting Bitcoin mining's role in renewable energy monetization, grid balancing, methane mitigation, and stranded energy capture. Research suggesting that in many cases, Bitcoin mining can reduce net emissions rather than increase them. While the original New Scientist post struggled to reach engagement, replies correcting the record racked up thousands of impressions and hundreds of likes each, signaling where the audience and the facts landed. Now, this is just absolutely insane to me. Again, I thought that we were past this. I thought that we were past the, Ripple-funded FUD campaign, the Change the Code campaign that went out a couple of years ago. I thought we were past it. I thought we were past the Alex de Vries, Dutch central banker, Bitcoin FUD that was just completely debunked time and time and time again by the likes of people like Daniel Batten. But this was just an absolutely I think, irresponsible piece of journalism. And at the end of the day, because people do apparently read and listen to New Scientist. But what really struck me here was just the audacity of this. Because imagine calling the only viable solution to a global, broken global monetary system the, quote, worst idea of the 21st century. Imagine ignoring the fact that Bitcoin is a financial lifeline for millions of people without access to banks all across the world or who live under authoritarian regimes and are debanked. Or pretending that Bitcoin doesn't monetize stranded energy and wasted energy, pretending that it doesn't have a huge role in grid balancing. Imagine calling that the worst idea of the 21st century. This is one of the, Bitcoin is actually one of the highest, I think probably the highest still, in terms of renewable energy usage for any industry on the planet. So for people that purportedly care about, the environment and the climate and say that, we're boiling the oceans and all this, I would just invite them to look at the basic facts. And the basic facts are that Bitcoin is a net positive for the environment. Even if it wasn't, even if Bitcoin was a net negative for the environment, which it is not, again, but even if it wasn't, the benefits that Bitcoin has are so numerous and so go so deep in terms of banking the unbanked, creating a money that is not subject to the whims of central bankers, creating a money that can't be confiscated, that can't be debased. This is so valuable that even if it was boiling the oceans, I think it would still be worth it. But luckily, it's not. It's actually a net benefit. It actually makes some of this renewable energy build out, which has not made sense since its start, and given all the government subsidies, finally makes some sense because you actually have a buyer who can help you balance that load, soak up energy during low demand times, and turn off as soon as high demand for energy peaks. But so this really wasn't even just a terrible, awful, moronic take. It was a signal. It's a signal that legacy narratives are colliding head on with open source truth. And the receipts are all public. We all get to now, write about this for years to come and look, say how silly New Scientist was and how they misled and lied to their readers. Moments like this really, though, further demonstrate how early we are. Bitcoin is just getting started. The majority of the world still doesn't own it, even of the people who own it. Most people still don't fully understand it. I'm still working there, well on my way. Hank, love to bring you back on here to talk about this. I mean, what was your initial reaction when you saw this just rather outrageous clip and the accompanying post? I mean, did you think we went back in a time machine to a couple years ago? What was your take on it?
Yeah, Walker, I haven't felt this dumb after watching a video since I saw the live action version of Cats. This was the dumbest thing I've ever. These were narratives that I remember like 5, 6, 7 years ago. To your point, like Bitcoin's energy consumption for miners, renewables, it's like 50 to 70%. It's something huge, and it's only getting bigger. They're bringing back the dark web talk of the 2010s. Like this is grasping at straws because we're seeing Bitcoin slowly but surely work its way into the monetary system, and a lot of people just don't want to do the homework on it, and they prefer to rest on these narratives of yesteryear, and it's just dumb. The video was dumb. These were uninformed people talking about something they clearly don't have any idea about truly, and I definitely feel like I've lost a couple IQ points after watching that. Yeah, that's my initial take. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I honestly thought it must have been satire, that it must have been parody, that there was, I don't know if I've ever seen a video where in such a short amount of time, you heard so much just blatant, like so many blatant falsehoods and just easily disprovable falsehoods, Hank. That was the thing, the sheer gall of coming out, making all these statements with a straight face and the condescension that you could just feel dripping from their voices. You'd be better off just buying Pokemon cards. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, and the thing is, it's ultimately, who does this hurt? It hurts people who still believe that that there's any sort of trust to be had in legacy institutions. And maybe those people don't deserve to get Bitcoin yet. I don't know. I would like to see everybody get Bitcoin because this is a monetary technology, a savings technology, a transactional technology that is changing the world and will change it so much more. And I think it is just a shame. And honestly, these sorts of publications that print these blatant falsehoods, I think should just be ashamed of themselves because there are people out there who are going to they don't have the time. They're busy. They're trying to make ends meet in this broken fiat world that we live in. They come across something like this and they say, oh, well, this is from New Scientist with 4.2 million followers on X. It must be reputable. And that's just a shame, I think. But I truly have never seen so many falsehoods about Bitcoin packed into such a short amount of time. Really quite impressive at the end of the day.
Yeah, just a lot of FUD there. I don't, especially in today's day and age, I don't know where they're getting. I feel like they looked on ChatGPT like talking points about anti-Bitcoin from 2015, and they didn't mention AI or anything either. AI is consuming just as much, if not more, energy than anything out there right now, and we're not even 100% sure of where that's necessarily going to lead us to a more prosperous future or maybe our doomsday. I don't know. And then to your point, this account you said has nearly 5 million subscribers, and it really speaks to the lack of media credibility that we have today in this internet era. Anybody can put out a video and they've got a lot of followers. People assume that comes with a certain level of credibility, but as you and I saw with this video, it does not, because that is not credible information, even though they have that many viewers. So again, this is an indictment on the uneducated, the unwilling, and just kind of where we are in the media today, where you can have a lot of followers, but that doesn't mean for a second we should trust you. We don't even trust the information that's coming out of our government right now. So it really places an importance on how this new media system is going to operate. And people are looking for personalities they can truly trust. And it's a little disheartening to see we have 5 million people trusting this garbage. I don't like it. I don't like it. This is old news. We're past this. Pick up a book, guys. I don't know what else to say. I don't like it.
Yeah, it's ultimately just, I think it's a sign of, let's flip this around, the glass half full. It's a sign of how early we still are. Even after we thought we'd put these things to bed, even though there's so many dozens of peer-reviewed scientific articles about there and publications showing that, look, here are all the positive impacts that Bitcoin actually has for the environment. Hey, here's how, Bitcoin isn't just used by criminals. Yeah, it's used by criminals. Of course it is. Again, so is the dollar in much larger percentages, right? In much larger raw figures as well. And the larger point here is that, I think what really just worked up my ire here, Hank, was saying, it's a contender for worst idea of the 21st century. I think this will go down as one of the worst takes in the 21st century. As we go and move forward, we see how Bitcoin reprices the world, as we see what Bitcoin offers. We've already seen so much of it. If you've been paying attention, if you've been paying attention to the work of the Human Rights Foundation, all the incredible work that they do, showing how Bitcoin has really been a lifeline for human rights activists around the world living in oppressive regimes. I mean, you should be able to look at that alone. And Hank, all it takes is a Google search. But apparently they just weren't even willing to do that. But I think it's just a sign. Again, this goes back to kind of a little bit of a theme of this discussion here today, which is just that in this hyper online 24/7, 365 second by second news coverage culture, somehow you can still manage to miss news that is multiple years old. You missed the fact, new scientist apparently, that Bitcoin is actually good for the environment, not bad, that it's good for human rights. And yeah, it can be used by criminals too. But you know what? There's a reason dictators hate Bitcoin, right? It's because it takes away their power. And at the end of the day, I mean, even just the point, well, you can't use it for anything, can't spend it anywhere. Square just opened up the ability for 4 million merchants in the US alone to accept Bitcoin. I mean, it's Hank. I truly, I don't know if I can talk about it anymore. It's gonna drive me up the wall again because it's just shocking. But luckily, there's great places that you can actually get decent news with honest coverage, like right here on Roxom TV.
That's right. I mean, pretty much all I was thinking was like, tell me you're uninformed about this topic without telling me you're uninformed about this topic. And you said this is a terrible take. This was a terrible take if this was back in 2015 and we were seeing it now. But this is a take I saw this morning. And right now it's already in contention for the worst take of the year, only minutes after I saw it. Really bad stuff. We're not here for it, guys. Get a book, get something, watch Roxom. You're really poisoning the rest of the world with this rhetoric. I don't like it. But what I do like is having you with me on the show on Thursdays and Fridays, Walker. It has been an absolute treat as always. So thank you so much for making the time. I love co-hosting this second hour with you, and I'm excited for more of it tomorrow as we wrap up this week here at RoxomTV News.
Likewise, Hank. Always great to be on with you. Excited to tackle it all again tomorrow. We'll see you soon.
See you, buddy. All right, gang, that's a wrap for today's edition of RoxomTV News. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, make sure you're following, and subscribing. RoxomTV News, RoxomTV, Hank at RoxomTV, and Walker America as well. There's great stuff you can find there on all the biggest platforms, so make sure to check us out. And right now on RoxomTV, coming up at 2 p.m. EST, we have the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission are holding a rare event focusing on aligning their regulatory approaches to Bitcoin. And you can watch that right here on RoxomTV. So don't go anywhere. We're going to have that and more coming up today. So stay tuned, and we will see you tomorrow as we wrap up the week here at RoxomTV News. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you boys and girls mañana. Cheers.